Welcome back to Freedom Friday. Those who follow us on Freedom Friday will recall that some time ago we presented on the heroic actions of Ebed Melech, the black Hebrew, whose quick action saved the life of Jeremiah the prophet. Without him, Jeremiah's message would have been delivered by another man. But today, we will look at Ebed Melech, the man. Who was he? And how does his situation help to throw light on the black experience among the covenant people? And what role does he play as part of the great cloud of witnesses surrounding black persons of faith today as we seek to stand in the strength of our God given identity? The first thing to note about this extraordinary man is the obvious statement of Jeremiah 38:7, which refers to him as a Cushite, an official in the royal palace. It wasn't unusual for a Cushite to be found in a Hebrew court. When the Hebrews came out of a long period of slavery in Egypt, there were a mixed multitude, a diverse assembly of people from various ethnic and cultural backgrounds who had witnessed Yahweh's mighty deliverance from Egypt. Among them were Cushites, Egyptians, and others who joined the Israelites in covenant faith. These individuals, some foreigners by birth, became fully integrated into the life, worship, and leadership structures of Israel. Most of the patriarchs married Cushite or Egyptian wives and had families which were black and Hebrew. We don't know how Ebed Melech came into his position, but we're not surprised to encounter him there. Next, we note his name, Ebed Melech. That's a Hebrew name. Some authorities insist that this is not his real name because they assume he could not be both Cushite and Hebrew. They suggest he might have been a slave who has been given a Hebrew name. And while this might have been a possibility, I fear there is usually an unfortunate rush to suggest slavery when speaking of black people. But the name Ebed Melech, which translates to servant of the king, need not imply enslavement. In fact, as shown in numerous 7th century Judaite seals, this was a title of rank, often designating trusted royal officials. Moreover, by the time of Jeremiah, Israel's court included diverse figures: Ethiopians, Egyptians, and other foreign-born individuals, some of whom, like Ebed Melech, had adopted the faith and culture of Israel without renouncing their heritage. It is both biblically and historically plausible, then, for a Cushite to bear a Hebrew name, just as it was for Joseph to receive an Egyptian one, or Daniel to be renamed in Babylon. This dual identity, Cushite in origin, Hebrew in faith and office, makes Ebed Melech not a contradiction, but a powerful example of God's inclusive covenant and the spiritual authority of those long overlooked. Thirdly, Ebed Melech was a highly respected official in the king's court. The court consisted of some unscrupulous and dangerous men, Hebrew men, whose only aim was to maintain power at all cost. Even the king, admittedly not the most courageous individual, was intimidated by them. By contrast, the Cushite appears to have developed a reputation for trustworthiness, wisdom, and faithfulness. The Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary says it well. Amid the confusion of the bewildering times that tormented Zedekiah, he found in this loyal servant a refreshing confidence. This is evidenced by the king's response to his plea for the prophet's life. He chose to risk the wrath of his treacherous officials and gave Ebed Melech permission to take what he needed and save the prophet's life. Fourthly, Ebed Meleck was a courageous man. He knew he was being targeted. He knew he was taking a huge risk when he acted to save the prophet's life. Nonetheless, he acted with courage and boldness on behalf of the prophet. This is not to say he wasn't afraid for his life, because he was. If you read the words of Jeremiah to him after the incident, it indicates that he expected the officials to come after him and he was frightened. But the essence of courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite the fear. So from this perspective, Ebed-Melech demonstrated remarkable courage. He acted to save one who was being targeted by political violence inflicted on him by people in power. Jeremiah was targeted for speaking an uncomfortable truth, one that the leaders did not want to hear, so they responded with violence, as is typical of people with power when that power is threatened for any reason. Finally, Ebed-Melech was a man of faith. In recognition of who he was and what he represented himself to be, his identity, Yahweh sent a message by the prophet specifically for him. Jeremiah, the Hebrew prophet, check this out, whose life he saved, was sent with a message from Yahweh for the Cushite. The power of this event is highlighted by the historical reality of the moment. At the time Jeremiah was delivering a message of Yahweh's favor upon the African, the Hebrew people were being taken into Babylonian captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar. A coincidence, you might think? On the contrary, I believe it is the point of the entire counter-narrative. Ebed-Melech represents the faithful remnant who was kept safe from judgment. Think about that for a moment. The Cushite who was supposedly under a curse now represents the faithful remnant, while the covenant people are led away to sit and wail by the rivers of Babylon. Yahweh sends his prophet to say to the African specifically, I will surely save you because you trust me. And yet, the silence surrounding this remarkable individual, Ebed-Melech, the Cushite, is deafening. Here was a man, black, foreign, and faithful, who risked his life to save a prophet of God, who spoke truth to power, and whose trust in Yahweh earned him a personal word of divine assurance in the darkest chapters of biblical Israel's history. And yet, after the moment passes, he vanishes from the pages of Scripture and from the memory of most religious traditions, while other figures are enshrined in sermons and songs and study guides. Ebed-Melech remains in the margins, unnamed by extra-biblical historians, rarely mentioned in rabbinic or Christian patristic commentary. Even though his faith, courage, and compassion rival that of better-known heroes, his story has too often been left untold. Why? Perhaps because his presence challenges the assumptions of some traditions. A black man, a Cushite, acting with greater righteousness than the king of Israel or the king of Judah, the court or the priesthood. Perhaps because his story exposes the way marginalized people are often used by God but ignored by men. And yet, God saw him, God remembered him, and in a moment of judgment, in the time of judgment and destruction, he represents the true remnant because God said, you have put your trust in me. Thank you for joining me on this week's Freedom Friday. Remember to hit the subscribe button in YouTube if you haven't done so as yet. Feel free to share it with others as well. Until next week then, walk good and walk free. This is Freedom Friday, where we tell the whole story.